Snow fell that night like the breath of God, slow, relentless, pure enough to hide everything men wished to forget. It softened the jagged lines of the Bitter Creek Valley, covered wagon tracks, buried fences, and swallowed the echo of distant gunfire. The mountains crouched in the dark like old beasts, their shoulders cloaked in silence. Wind whispered through dead branches, and the moon, half veiled by cloud, watched over the valley like a cold, unblinking eye. Tawina Greyhawk trudged through that silence, a shape against the white. His arms carried a bundle wrapped in buffalo hide, heavy with a weight the snow could not soften. The storm clawed at his face, froze his breath into silver threads, but he did not feel the cold. His wife Enoki was gone, slipped away hours ago as dawn's first light tried to reach the valley and failed. The cries had stopped. The world had gone still. His boots crunched over the frozen path that led to his cabin. Smoke no longer rose from its chimney. Inside, the fire was dying, its glow flickering like a weak pulse across the log walls. He laid her gently near the hearth, pulling back the hide. Her face was calm, almost sleeping, her lips pale as milk. He knelt beside her, fingers brushing the braid of black hair that once smelled of sage and rain. "I will take you home," he murmured in Apache. The words broke apart as soon as they left him. He found the shovel by the door. The handle was splintered, its iron blade cracked, but it would do. He stepped back into the storm, snow stinging his bare arms. The ground fought him, frozen solid, but he dug anyway. Hours passed, or maybe it was days. Time bled and blurred until all that remained was breath, earth, and grief. When the hole was deep enough, he carried her out, wrapped her again, and placed her beneath the roots of an old cedar. He whispered a hymn his mother once sang over the dead, a melody older than the town that scorned him, older than the country that claimed his blood. The snow fell heavier, erasing the grave as he worked. When he was done, he stayed on his knees, head bowed, until dawn crept gray and thin across the horizon. Down in the valley, the widow Eleanor Renfield stood at her window, watching the same dawn. From her parlor she could see smoke struggling from distant chimneys, the small town of Bitter Creek waking to another hard winter's day. But her gaze was fixed on the far ridge, where a dark figure moved slowly against the white. Even from here she could sense the sorrow in his steps. Her house was warm, too warm. The fire in the marble hearth hissed as she poured water over it, trying to silence its cheer. Her maid, Ruthie, entered with tea and the morning's news. "That Apache up by the ridge lost his woman last night," she said, voice low but eager. "Martha Kincaid says she died birthing a babe that didn't live an hour." Eleanor's hand froze on the cup. "And no one helped?" "Who would?" Ruthie shrugged. "He ain't welcome here. The sheriff says he should have left months ago." Eleanor looked back toward the ridge, her heart beating against her ribs like something caged. She remembered the man faintly, a quiet figure who traded pelts at the general store once a month. Eyes too sharp, voice too soft. The kind of man people feared without reason. "Prepare a basket," Eleanor said finally. "Bread, stew, coffee, anything warm." Ruthie blinked. "You can't mean to." "I do." The maid's protests fell away under the authority of Eleanor's tone. She had learned to command silence since her husband's death. The town still whispered about that too, that the widow Renfield smiled at her husband's funeral, that she slept in silk while his body cooled in pine. The lies stuck like burrs no matter how quietly she lived. By mid-morning, Eleanor set out alone. The snow had deepened, swallowing her boots as she followed the ridge trail. The wind pressed her skirts to her legs, carrying the scent of cedar and smoke. She clutched the basket tight, more to steady herself than to protect its contents. When she reached the cabin, the door was half open, snow curling across the threshold. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of pine pitch and grief. Ta sat before the fire, bare-chested, skin bronzed and scarred, eyes hollow as a dry well. She hesitated. "Mr. Greyhawk?" He turned, slow as if remembering the sound of human speech. His gaze met hers, and for a long moment neither moved. "I brought food," she said softly. "For you." He shook his head. "Don't need it." His voice was deep, roughened by exhaustion. "You haven't eaten." "I buried her," he said simply. "That is enough." The silence that followed was thick and fragile. Eleanor set the basket near the fire and turned to leave, but her hand lingered on the doorframe. "The snow's still falling," she murmured. "You'll freeze if you don't keep the fire fed." Ta looked at her, really looked, past the fine wool cloak, the golden hair braided down her shoulder, into the eyes that held both sorrow and stubbornness. "Why do you care?" "Because I know what it is to lose," she whispered, the words trembling out before she could catch them. He said nothing. She left, closing the door softly behind her. By afternoon, the storm worsened. Wind howled through the valley, rattling shutters and bending trees to the earth. Ta sat alone, watching the flames twist. He reached for the bread she'd left. It was still warm, faintly sweet. He tore a piece, chewed slowly. Each bite tasted of memory he didn't want, his wife's laughter, her hands kneading dough beside him last spring. The ache came sharp and sudden. He pushed the food away, rose and stepped outside. The snow had buried the path to the grave. He followed it by instinct, kneeling before the cedar again. "I'm sorry," he said to the earth. "I should have saved you." His breath fogged, vanished. "I don't know how to keep living without turning wild." Down in the town, word spread faster than the wind. By sundown, every tongue wagged. The widow had gone to the Apache's cabin. Twice they said. Some swore she stayed till dark. Martha Kincaid saw her return, hair damp with snow, cheeks flushed. "Disgraceful," the women muttered. Her husband barely a year gone. That night, Eleanor sat by her window again. The lamplight gilded her hair like melted gold. She could feel the weight of their judgment even through the glass. In the distance, lightning flickered over the ridge, silent, brief. She thought of the man alone up there, the snow pressing him into the world like a ghost that refused to fade. Ruthie entered quietly. "Ma'am, the sheriff says you should keep to town. Folks are talking." "Let them talk," Eleanor said without looking away from the window. "It's all they have to do." After Ruthie left, Eleanor reached for her shawl. Outside, the air bit through fabric and skin alike. She walked to the edge of her porch, where the snow met the dark. The wind carried faint sounds, the rustle of trees, the echo of a distant coyote. She whispered into that stillness, "No one should eat alone after death." Up on the ridge, Ta's fire flickered out. He stood beneath the cedar, snow collecting in his hair, his breath shallow but steady. The sound of wind filled the world, yet somewhere within it, he thought he heard a woman's voice, soft, uncertain, carried by the storm.
He looked toward the valley, toward the faint glow of a lantern moving through the snow. For the first time since dawn, he felt something stir inside him, small, bewildering, alive. He took a step forward, then another, until his boots left a trail of prints leading down the mountain. The storm swallowed him whole, but the faint light below kept burning, unwavering, waiting. Snow clung to the valley like a fever refusing to break. Each dawn arrived pale and reluctant, spreading light that revealed nothing but more white, more silence, more proof that the world had frozen mid-breath. The town below stirred only in ritual, smoke from chimneys, horses stamping in their stalls, gossip clinking from porch to porch like wind chimes. Above it all, on the ridge, a single column of smoke rose from a cabin that refused to die out. Eleanor Renfield watched that smoke from her window, teacup untouched, shawl drawn tight. The servants whispered that the Apache hadn't left his home since burying his wife. They said he was cursed, that death followed him like a shadow. But Eleanor couldn't forget the way he'd looked when she first saw him. Grief carved deep, yet something inside refusing to break. She envied that kind of strength. When the noon bells rang from the church, she rose. The snow had softened into slow, drifting flakes. She wrapped bread, salt pork, and a flask of coffee into a parcel. "You'll catch your death," Ruthie warned, but Eleanor only smiled. "If it comes from kindness, it's a death worth catching." The climb was harder that day, the air biting at her lungs. The path wound through cedars, their limbs sagging with white weight. When she reached the cabin, the smoke from its chimney was faint, as though unsure it should bother continuing. She knocked once. Silence. Again. Then the door creaked open. Tawina Greyhawk stood inside, bare-armed, eyes dark as thawed earth. He looked thinner, his face hollowed by hunger and sleepless nights. The smell of smoke and pine resin filled the air. "I brought food again," she said, lifting the parcel. He stared a long moment before stepping aside. The gesture was neither invitation nor refusal, only weary surrender. She entered, brushing snow from her cloak. The room was dim, lit by a single flame struggling against the cold. His wife's belongings still lingered. An embroidered shawl on the chair, a bead necklace hung above the bed. Ghosts, carefully kept. Eleanor set the bread on the table and unwrapped it. "You've eaten nothing," she said. "I have eaten enough of what the earth gives," he murmured. "And what is that?" He met her eyes. Silence. Regret. She hesitated, then poured coffee into a tin cup. Then have warmth instead. He accepted it, his large hands dwarfing the cup. Steam coiled upward, catching the light like smoke from a dying fire. For a long while they sat without speaking. Outside, snow tapped gently against the window. "My husband hated winter," she said finally. "He used to say it stripped men down to what they really were." Toss' gaze drifted to the fire. "Maybe that is why some don't survive it." Her throat tightened. "Perhaps." The silence stretched, not awkward but heavy with something unspoken. She studied him. The scars across his shoulder, the rough grace of his movements. There was no vanity, only endurance. "Tell me about her," she said quietly. He looked up sharply, then down again. "There is nothing to tell. She was good. She sang when the river thawed. She wanted a child." Eleanor's fingers tightened around her cup. "I'm sorry." He nodded once. "So am I." The fire snapped, scattering sparks like fleeting stars. He tore a piece of bread and ate it slowly, each bite a reluctant concession to the living. Eleanor found herself watching the rhythm of his hands, steady, deliberate, almost reverent. "You should not come here," he said after a while. "The town will talk." "They already do." "Then why feed the flames?" "Because you're cold," she said simply. "And because I'm tired of pretending I'm not." That earned the faintest flicker of surprise in his eyes, quickly hidden. "You don't owe me mercy." "Maybe I owe it to myself." Wind pressed against the walls, a low groan. The snow outside thickened, muffling the world into stillness. He rose to add wood to the fire, the muscles in his back shifting like stone beneath water. She looked away, cheeks warming. "You were a soldier once," she said, not as question but memory. She'd heard it whispered. His jaw tightened. "I carried a rifle for men who promised peace. I learned they meant silence. And now? Now I build fences no one crosses." She studied the flicker of flame in his eyes. "Maybe you don't need more fences. Maybe you need a door." He glanced toward her, something unreadable moving through his expression. A door can open both ways. The meaning lingered between them, uncertain, fragile. Outside, thunder rumbled far off, snow thunder, low and strange, the skies warning. Eleanor rose, brushing crumbs from her skirt. "The storm's worsening. I should go." He followed her to the door. "It's not safe. I've walked through worse." "Not alone." She hesitated, surprised by the softness beneath his words. "Then you better walk me back." He grabbed his coat, fur-lined and heavy, and stepped into the storm beside her. They moved in silence, lantern light carving a small circle of gold against the white. The snow fell thicker now, flakes swirling like ashes. Halfway down the trail, Eleanor stumbled on a hidden route. His hand caught her arm, firm but gentle. The heat of his touch startled her more than the fall itself. For a moment, neither moved. The storm whirled around them, their breaths mingling in the cold air. "Thank you," she whispered. He released her slowly. "Careful. The earth hides its teeth in winter." When they reached her gate, the town below was already shuttered in against the storm. The windows glowed faintly, like watchful eyes. She turned to him. "They'll see you." "I don't care." "You should." He looked past her to the dark outlines of the houses. "They already see what they fear. I can't teach them sight." She smiled faintly, sad and small. "Then perhaps I will." The wind tugged at her hair, scattering gold across her shoulders. She wanted to say more, to ask if he'd eaten, if he'd sleep, if he'd ever forgive himself, but the words stayed buried beneath her ribs. Instead, she lifted the empty basket. "Thank you for walking me." He nodded, turning back toward the ridge. "Tawina," she called softly. The name felt foreign on her tongue, intimate. He stopped, glancing over his shoulder. "If you ever tire of silence," she said, "there's always bread here." He said nothing, only held her gaze a heartbeat too long before disappearing into the storm. Inside, Eleanor closed the door and leaned against it, her pulse racing. The house was quiet, save for the faint crackle of the hearth. She realized then that she'd left her gloves on his table, folded beside the bread knife. Up on the ridge, Ta sat before the fire again. The gloves lay untouched. He reached for them once, then drew his hand back, staring into the flames. They flickered against his skin, painting him in gold and shadow.
Outside, the storm roared, swallowing every sound, until through its howl came a faint echo, the church bell tolling midnight. He rose and moved to the window. Far below, a single light still burned in the widow's house, steady against the dark. For the first time since the burial, Ta breathed deeply. The air stung his lungs, sharp and alive. He whispered something low in Apache, a word that meant hope, though it had been years since he'd spoken it aloud. Then, beyond the curtain of snow, a gunshot cracked through the valley, distant but real. Ta's body went still, every sense sharpening. He turned toward the sound, eyes narrowing, the warmth of the fire forgotten as the world outside shifted from morning to warning. The storm lasted 3 days. Wind screamed through the Bitter Creek Valley like something half alive, slamming at doors, gnawing at the seams of every cabin and heart. Snow piled against windows, swallowing the world in white blindness. When it finally passed, the air lay still, so still it felt sacred. The sky opened wide in merciless blue. Beneath it, the town crept back into motion, shoveling, mending, and whispering. Eleanor Renfield stood at her porch railing, cheeks raw from the cold, eyes tracing the ridge above. Smoke drifted from Tawina Greyhawk's chimney, faint but steady. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt the same ache she'd carried since that night, the sound of the gunshot echoing through her ribs like a half-remembered dream. No one else had heard it. When she asked around town, faces turned politely away. It was easier to dismiss her than to admit fear. Down by the general store, the talk had already begun to sour. Martha Kincaid's voice rang out sharp and shrill as the church bell. "She goes up there every week," she said, slicing through a loaf of gossip as though carving bread. "Brings him stew, bread, whatever else she can bake. You mark me, it ain't charity that keeps her climbing that ridge." Jonas Pike, leaning against the post beside her, spat into the snow. His jaw was tight, his eyes mean. "She's lonely, that's all. But a woman's got no right being lonely for the likes of him." Sheriff Amos Carver listened from the porch, pipe smoke curling around his head. "Leave it," he said gruffly. "Widow's her own business." Martha sniffed. "Until it turns into everyone's shame." The sheriff exhaled, long and tired. "World's already full of shame, Martha. Don't need help making more." But when Eleanor passed by a moment later, their eyes all turned the same direction, heavy with judgment she could feel prickling her skin. She kept walking. She had learned not to let her face show what her heart carried. By late afternoon, the snow began to melt along the southern slopes, dripping from the eaves in clear, fragile threads. She took that as a sign, the earth softening, the world forgiving. She filled her basket again, bread, dried apples, a jar of honey. The path up the ridge was slick and narrow. Her boots sank through melting crust, water seeping cold through her stockings. When she reached Ta's cabin, she found him outside, chopping wood with slow precision. His bare arms gleamed in the weak sun, his breath rising in clouds. He looked up when she approached, eyes narrowing against the light. "You should stay in town. The ground's treacherous." "And you'd rather I starved you by kindness?" she said lightly. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "You've grown sharper. Winter teaches everyone to be." She held up the basket. "I brought honey this time. Thought you might remember sweetness." He took it from her, fingers brushing hers, rough warmth against her chilled skin. That simple touch startled her more than she'd admit. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine sap and smoke. He set the basket down, poured water from a pail, and gestured for her to sit. She watched him work, the quiet grace in the way he moved, measured, deliberate, as though every gesture was a prayer to balance. When he poured her coffee, she noticed the bruise along his jaw, faint yellow fading to blue. "You were in a fight," she said. He shook his head. "A warning." "From who?" "Men who still carry war in their bones." Her hand tightened around the cup. "You mean from the town? They fear what they don't understand. Fear makes men foolish. And what does it make women?" He looked at her then, long enough that she felt the air shift between them. "Brave," he said simply. Silence folded around them, warm this time. She tore a piece of bread, dipped it in honey, and passed it to him. He hesitated before taking it, eyes fixed on hers. The fire crackled. Outside, melting snow fell from the roof in soft, rhythmic thuds. I heard a gunshot that night, she said quietly. The storms last night. Ta froze mid-bite. You shouldn't have. Then it was real. He didn't answer. The muscles in his throat tightened, his gaze falling to the fire. Tell me. It was nothing, he said, but the lie sat too heavy. You don't know how to lie, she whispered. It shows in your shoulders. He gave a small, bitter laugh. And you don't know how to leave a wound closed. She met his eyes. Maybe because mine never healed. For a long while the only sound was fire and breath. Then he said softly, a man came to my door. Drunk. Angry. Wanted to remind me I don't belong. He fired into the trees when I refused to fight. That's all. But it isn't, is it? He didn't reply. His silence was answer enough. When she rose to leave, the air between them felt heavier, thick with what neither would name. He walked her down halfway, the trail muddy beneath melting snow. At one point she slipped, and his hand caught her elbow again. Same place, same warmth. Next time, he murmured, don't bring food. Just come. Her heart faltered, caught between fear and longing. She said nothing, only nodded once, then turned toward the valley. That night, the town buzzed with rumor sharper than the frost. Martha claimed she saw the Apache's shadow at the widow's porch. Jonas swore he'd heard her laugh echoing from the ridge. Every story grew teeth. Even the sheriff, though he said nothing, began watching Eleanor with tired suspicion. By morning she felt the change in the air, the stares longer, the smiles shorter. Ruthie avoided her eyes. In the church, whispers followed her like smoke. She sat through the sermon, back straight, face calm, but her pulse hammered. When the hymns ended, she rose before anyone else and walked out. The cold bit at her cheeks, the sky a wide gray bruise. She didn't return home. She went to the ridge instead. Ta was mending a broken fence when she arrived. He saw her expression and didn't ask. She walked past him into the cabin and stood before the fire. They've decided what I am, she said. So let them be right about at least one thing. He stepped inside slowly. You shouldn't throw yourself to their hate. I've been their gossip since I buried my husband, she said. At least now I can choose the reason. Her voice trembled, not from shame but release. He came closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath. Eleanor, he said softly, as though the name were a fragile thing. You don't know what you're offering. I'm offering honesty. His hand brushed her jaw, rough thumb tracing the line of her cheek. Then hear mine. I am a man who brings ruin wherever he stays. Maybe I was already ruined, she said. And you're what's left of the truth. For a moment, everything held still. The snow outside fell slower, the world shrinking to firelight and breath. Then he stepped back, shaking his head. No. You don't understand the price. Then teach me, she whispered. He stared at her, torn between instinct and hunger. In the end, it wasn't a kiss that passed between them, but something quieter. A single touch, his forehead resting against hers, both trembling. When she left hours later, the fire still burned behind her eyes. The walk down felt longer, heavier. She could feel the world waiting, listening. The next morning, her window shattered. A stone rolled across the floor, wrapped in paper. Whore of Greyhawk. Her breath caught. The words seemed to hiss from the glass. She knelt, fingers shaking as Ruthie burst in. Who did this? Eleanor rose, calm now, colder. No one brave enough to sign their name. She didn't cry. Instead, she put on her coat and walked outside. The sky was iron gray. Townsfolk turned away as she passed. At the general store, she found Jonas Pike standing by the hitching post, whiskey sour breath fogging the air. You think you can shame me into silence? She said quietly. He smirked. You already done that yourself. Her hand flew before she thought, striking his face. The sound cracked like a whip. He stumbled back, eyes wide. Better a man with grief than a boy with gossip, she said, then turned and walked away. By dusk, Ta was outside her house, axe over his shoulder. He didn't knock. He simply began chopping wood, stacking the pieces neatly by her porch. Every swing echoed through the frozen air, a rhythm of defiance and protection. Eleanor stood inside, watching through the frosted glass, her heart breaking open in new shapes. When he finally stopped, she opened the door. They'll hate you for this, she said. They already do, he replied. And they'll hate me more. Then we'll give them something worth the hate. She laughed softly, the sound trembling with tears. You speak like a man who's already lost everything. I am, he said. That's why I'm not afraid. Night settled, deep and blue. He left without another word. She stood there long after, the chopped wood piled like a promise at her feet. Up the ridge, he sat by his fire, the echo of her voice haunting the room. He touched the gloves she'd left weeks ago, still folded on the table. Something in him wanted to believe that peace could exist between two worlds, but the sound of distant hoofbeats reminded him otherwise. Outside, the sheriff's lanterns flickered through the trees, 3 lights moving slow, deliberate. The wind carried their voices, low, cautious, armed. Toss' hand went to his rifle. Down in the valley, Eleanor's lamp burned late, her eyes fixed on the ridge. The faint glow of 3 lights climbed closer, steady as judgment. She pressed her palm to the glass and whispered, "Please not again." The wind swallowed her plea, carrying it up the mountain where the first snowflake of a new storm fell, soft, silent, and red in the firelight. The first shot broke the night like glass. It echoed through the ridge, sharp and final, scattering crows from the pines. Tawina Greyhawk dropped the log he carried and turned toward the sound. The low thud of hoofbeats, the dull glow of lanterns cutting through snow. He knew before he saw them that they came for him. The way men come for ghosts they fear but cannot stop hunting. Inside his cabin, the fire hissed low, a slow heartbeat against the cold. He reached for his rifle, checked the chamber, then set it down again. The instinct to fight was old, carved into him like bone, but something inside had grown tired of blood. He looked toward the gloves on the table, small and pale against the wood. They steadied him. Outside, the lanterns moved closer. Voices carried on the wind, Jonas Pike's sharp drawl, Sheriff Carver's rough murmur, and another he didn't recognize. The kind of talk that smelled of whiskey and fear. "Greyhawk." Jonas's voice rang out. "You've overstayed your welcome. Time you quit this ridge." Toss stepped outside, snow crunching under his boots. The moon hung thin above the trees, a blade of light. "I've harmed no one," he called. "You've taken the widow's name through the mud," Jonas spat. "You think the town will let that stand?" Behind him, Carver shifted uneasily. "No need for blood tonight, Pike. He leaves come sunrise, that's the end of it." Jonas ignored him. "Come down from that mountain, Greyhawk, or we'll drag you down dead." The cold wind carried no answer. Toss stood silent, hands empty, the world narrowing to snow and starlight. He could hear the slow crackle of the fire inside, smell the pine smoke on his skin. Then another voice broke through, softer, breathless, and impossibly near. "Stop this." Eleanor stumbled up the path, skirts heavy with snow, lantern shaking in her hand. Her face was pale, her hair wild from the wind. "He's done nothing," she cried. "You'll not touch him." Jonas's laughter was thin and cruel. "Then you admit it, he's yours." Her chin lifted. "If dignity means guilt in your eyes, then yes. He's mine." Carver swore under his breath. "Enough." Everyone backed down the hill. But Jonas was already raising his rifle, eyes bright with jealousy and liquor. The muzzle flashed. The bullet struck Toss' shoulder, spinning him backward into the snow. Eleanor screamed, rushing forward, lantern tumbling from her grasp. Toss' breath came ragged, the warmth of his blood spreading beneath him. Carver lunged for Jonas, knocking the rifle aside. "You damn fool," he shouted, but chaos had already begun. The third man fired blindly into the dark. The echo thundered off the cliffs. Horses reared, snow exploded under hooves. Eleanor dropped beside Taw, pressing her hands to his wound. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Please, don't leave me too." His eyes fluttered, pain and disbelief mingling. "You should have stayed away." "I couldn't," she said. "I won't." He tried to rise, but she held him down. "Be still. They'll kill you. Let them try." He struggled to his knees, blood staining the snow black. "No more running." Carver turned, shouting for calm, but Jonas's fury burned too bright. He grabbed the fallen lantern and hurled it toward the cabin. Glass shattered. Fire bloomed against the wall, hungry and fast. The night turned gold. Flames leapt high, devouring the roof, the heat melting snow into steam. Toss stared at it, the home he'd built, the last place his wife had breathed. For a moment, grief roared louder than pain. Then he rose fully, rifle in hand, and fired once into the air. The sound silenced everything. "Enough," he said, voice low but steady. "This ends now." Carver froze, torn between duty and shame. Jonas, panting, raised his pistol. "You think we'll let you walk away? I don't need your permission." Toss' eyes met Eleanor's across the firelight. "Get back," he told her. She shook her head. "No, not this time." Jonas fired again, the shot wild. Tom moved faster than thought. One step forward, the rifle swinging like an extension of his will. The butt struck Jonas square in the chest, sending him sprawling backward into the snow. The pistol clattered away. Enough. Carver bellowed, stepping between them, his hand out. Put it down, Greyhawk. No more killing. Ta stood breathing hard, the rifle heavy in his hands, smoke from the burning cabin curling around him like spirit fire. He could end it now. One trigger pull and the man who'd poisoned their peace would be gone. But he didn't. He lowered the weapon. The wind shifted, carrying sparks toward the trees. Eleanor's voice came, trembling but sure. Let it burn, she said. Let all of it burn. Carver nodded once, relief and regret mingling. He grabbed Jonas by the collar, dragging him down the path. The others followed, their shadows shrinking into darkness. When they were gone, only the crackle of flames and the slow fall of snow remained. Ta sank to his knees, exhausted, the rifle falling beside him. Eleanor knelt too, pressing cloth to his wound. The firelight painted her hair in gold, her tears in silver. You should have let me go, he whispered. Then who would I be, she murmured. Another coward hiding behind walls? I'm done being afraid. He winced, voice thin. They won't forgive you. Then I'll forgive myself. The roof caved in behind them, sparks bursting skyward like stars. She helped him to his feet, her shoulder beneath his arm, and together they watched the cabin crumble. The snow hissed where it touched the fire, steam rising in ghostly plumes. Everything I was, he said quietly, is in that flame. Then we start with what's left, she answered. He looked at her, this woman who had every reason to turn away, yet stood shining against the ruin like something born from it. In her eyes he saw no pity, only fierce, unyielding life. They moved slowly down the slope, his weight leaning into hers. Behind them, the fire dimmed, embers glowing against the white like the last heartbeat of a dying world. At the edge of the valley, dawn began to stir, a faint gold spilling across the horizon, soft and new. The storm had passed. The air smelled of smoke and thawing pine. Eleanor stopped, turning toward him. What will you do now? He looked up at the ridge where the last trail of smoke drifted skyward. Bury the fire, he said. Then follow wherever the snow melts. She smiled faintly, eyes wet. Then I suppose I'll follow too. He touched her hand, hesitant, reverent. The first light of morning caught their faces, softening every line of grief. For a long breath, the world held still as if afraid to disturb them. Then she said, voice barely above a whisper, You're bleeding again. He laughed softly, the sound rough but alive. Then I'm still here. They walked on, footprints merging in the pale snow. The ridge behind them faded into smoke and silence. Ahead, the valley opened wide, a place raw, uncertain but free. Far above, the cedar tree stood blackened but unbroken, roots deep beneath the frost. The wind moved through its branches like breath returned to a sleeping heart. And in that stillness, where gunfire had ended and snowfall began again, Tawina Greyhawk felt the impossible. The world had not ended with his sorrow. It had only begun. He looked toward Eleanor, her hair catching sunlight like wheat, her face turned to the wind. For the first time since his wife's last breath, he smiled, not in triumph, not in forgetfulness, but in peace. Behind them, the last ember died, and with it, the ghosts of all they had buried. Ahead, the snow glittered, unbroken. He reached for her hand, and she didn't hesitate. The valley exhaled. The world went quiet. And two hearts, long frozen by grief, began at last to breathe.